world. But speaking to people over the last, I suppose, 5 or 6 weeks, and I suppose some holidays sometimes brings a little bit up and down on run rate because there's some utilisation issues with contractors and holidays and that type of stuff. So maybe that form the foundations of those conversations. But people talking about the future, there's a lot of bad news about this. We know there's inflation. We've seen increases in salaries over the last year, which have been astronomical from some of the stuff that's been reported. And it's about whether or not, you can just pass that on to your clients, which obviously I think you can. In terms of some of the reports I've read recently, there was one McKinsey's did. I always find McKinsey's very biased anyway towards whatever narrative they're trying to push, but only 40% of the businesses they went out and surveyed were confident about business next year, which was, I think, down from about 72% or something from beginning of the year. There's obviously some worries out there. There's obviously the consumer side of the market is seeing inflation, and that's where it starts. If you see inflation in the consumer side, you start to see it in retail. Then you've got the spending stops, and essentially recessions aren't caused by stock market pricing or even by governments, really. Well, I suppose it is a little bit by governments because they're raising so much debt and causing problems and quantitative easing and that type of stuff. But in terms of if a recession comes, it's when people stop spending. I can't afford to buy this new car or have the plumber in or whatever else, and it's a bit of a drip down effect. So for the majority of the businesses, I think within the RDLC, you're going to be fairly insulated for a while. Medical, that shouldn't really slack off. But there will probably be some bumps in the roads where you're dealing with ventures that have maybe taken cash on, and that money becomes more expensive because interest rates are going to rise. There's a paper out from Goldman's that think there's going to be another 18 increases in interest rates over the next 12 months. And obviously that's US led, and then the rest kind of follows suit. So money is going to become more expensive. When money becomes more expensive to invest, less investment happens. Where somebody was running 10 projects, they might only run 5. So there might be some slowing down in certain areas, and it's about, how do you stay on top of that? What do you do to make sure that you've got an agile supply chain, and that you don't continue on with the hubris of doing extremely well and hiring if the market started to dip off. I just wanted to go over some of the notes for anybody who wasn't at the lunch on Thursday, some of the stuff that came out of that, and then open to floor to any questions around that to see, what people are doing, if they're doing anything at all. From what I understand from speaking to people in a group, and I speak to quite a few different people across different sectors, it's still good, still bubbling along in most places. And for those that didn't bounce straight back after the COVID issues, they're now starting to gain a little bit of traction in the space as well. But again, someone, if any of you stay in contact or keep on top of rather the financial pages, you'll see that most economists and experts, although I use that word lightly, kind of predicting back end of this year, beginning of next year for things to change. So as it sits at the moment, things are still fine. But some of the stats I pulled out were that actually during the credit crunch, over the 3 years of the credit crunch and the dropping in the market and everything else, and the house prices, etc., when they extrapolated the businesses that continue to do well, that were very agile, McKinsey's did a report on this, they grew by a compounded 11% when the rest of the world was going backwards. So look, there's always opportunity in chaos, and the RDLC always want to stay on top of things like this to make sure that, look, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, and just making sure that we are agile and prepared for that. Some of the notes that came out of Thursday was that people were looking at their supply chain, just making sure that they mapped standard operating procedures within their business. And look, it's something you should do anyway, because you want to be as efficient as possible. You want to be as fast as possible to make those placements happen, because barriers to entry into recruitment are quite low. So it is about the process you put in place and the relationships you build. Look at if the market does start to slow a little bit from the increase in inflation and the rates and things you have to pass on to end clients, look at the changes in their buying behavior. What are they prioritizing? What can you sit down with them and go through in terms of their roadmap of the future? Because some of the stuff I've done over the years, and you know, I'm one of the older farts, I think, within this sector, was look at what was going to go on and then help them do things like skills gap analysis, go in and do a map of the workforce they've got at that point in time to see whether there's unutilized skills, people you can actually get to buddy up. If there's dead wood, what's going to be the best process for that? And just as an intrinsic value to a business, it will win you contracts. And I've done that in many different public sector areas, and it gave us long-term contracts. But we were able to do things like fixed pricing, because if I can fix your price at a level where I still make a decent margin on it, but actually I'm cutting out 25-35% of the work I have to do my end, because I've got that contract and it's fixed and I know that I'm servicing and I just need to repeat business, and I then change my back end processes, you still come out in the same place. The client wins, you win. So it was a good opportunity to sit down with people and talk about inflation and the runaway inflation, but we were able to then map what they were trying to do on a roadmap, look at their skills gaps, look at their actual workforce requirements at that point in time, and then fix some sort of cost procedure, whether that's statement of works, time and materials, or just something project-based in terms of training and volumes and removals and placements is something we've done. That was a good part of the conversation on Thursday, and how we would do that. And I can go into that in a moment. I've done that. I've done that environment mapping, and the beauty of that is that doing the internal scope is that intrinsic value, but also you're on sole, but you end up getting very long-term partnerships out of that, because you become kind of symbiotic in terms of how you work on that recruitment process. One of the big things I would suggest to people to be doing now, because I'm sure everybody's trying to hire, and hiring internally is hard. Getting good candidates is hard. We're all in a candidate-driven market. Is revisiting your cash flows and making sure that you're factoring in some increases, in costs right across the board, factoring in increases in costs of staff, and then looking at where that is. Because if you do roll that forward a year and you have a kind of a worst case inflationary scenario, but not talking Neil Ferguson COVID worst case, I'm just talking a realistic worst case scenario that you might be able to roll forward. You might find pinch points in there in cash, and P&Ls are lovely to look at because they stretch everything over 12 months or further, but you could have cash low points in terms of payment of VAT, PAYE, rent, bonuses, and then you've got those increases in there as well. And so even though your P&L might look fine, you might have a really low cash point. And if you've got that, that's not a problem for your business, but you need to be able to sit there with your bank or your ID provider and just give them, if you give them some foresight on what's going to happen, they are always so much more amiable and will put things in place. Whatever there's various different scenarios they can do. But if you do it last minute, they will screw you if they give you the money. They will put things in place that are covenants that slow the growth of your business. And look, if you've given some foresight and you've been investing, but you've got a scenario where things may tail off a little bit, but you still want to invest for that growth, you might see a position where you have to go out to alternative investment, and that takes a little bit of time. But these are all things I would suggest that you're doing at the moment, and looking at that kind of strategic spend, in that we want to keep growing, even if the cost and inflation tightens certain things in this market, and non-strategic spend. Do we really need to do this? Something you should do in your business anyway, but I do find when businesses are doing really, really well, they hire and hire and hire, but their standards drop a little bit. Their processes get a little bit stretched. They're not always looking at how they can sharpen their pencil in terms of what they're doing. Automation, we talked a lot about that. Now, I think automation's been key to the success of many in the RDLC, but again, that's because it's also been very hard to get our own labour, and labour isn't cheap anymore. It's expensive. But the more you can automate, the more you can expedite those processes and make sure that you don't have those bottlenecks. And if you do, and there is things that fall down, you have warning systems in place. So you're on top of it. You're not finding out too late to actually take any actions on that. Be ready to look at all of your terms. We did in COVID when the world stopped for a little bit. We went back out to our providers, our third-party suppliers, and we made sure we were on top of their pricing. Okay, because you've got to be looking at this from both ends, knowing that if the market does get some of these inflationary pressures, what you can be tighter on internally, and what you can be tighter on in terms of process, and what actually gives you a return on investment. Again, all these things I think you should be doing in your business anyway. I know many don't, because too focused on growing the business, that's fine. But just making sure that you understand your business A to Z, be really micro on your business, so you understand those costs and what can be switched on, what can be switched off, and what's going to bring you savings. And again, when you fix contracts, looking at if you're going to fix pricing, the payment terms, because cash is king. That's what's going to keep you alive, whether you're making profits or not making profit. As long as you've got cash to meet all your requirements each and every month, you will continue to trade until you trade out of any difficult positions. But making sure that if you are doing anything on the client side and it is fixing, that your payment terms are nailed down, that you're making sure that you can then work on your cash flows correctly, understand your debtor days. And that's the type of stuff that your bank and your ID and anybody else, your investors, if you've got them and your board, will want to be able to see in terms of your planning for the future. And other than that, we kind of looked at that in a totality and said, look, things are fairly good at the moment for everybody, but there has been some rumblings, there have been some conversations. You might see end clients that aren't necessarily going to pull back, but they might need to sit and do their cash flows again. They might need to be doing a bit of refocusing and saying, right, okay, well, because you'll see it in your ID facilities and your banking. Your banking's going to go up, right? Your costs are going to go up. Your ID facility is going to go up. I mean, it is cheap. Relatively, money is still super cheap, right? So don't be afraid of debt. Don't be afraid of going out and using money to leverage, because you can only make hay while the sun shines, right? So you've got to keep going at it. We're not talking about doing anything at all, but other than knowing your business and understanding the levers you've got within your business to pull. And also, if you mapped out those 18-point rises over that period of time and said, right, okay, that's rarely are a bank's economists right, but this is where we might get to. What does that mean in terms of your costing? Seeing quite a few businesses, one I spoke to the other week, which is it's opened up in America, it's doing well in America, but most of the financing for the continual growth is coming from Europe to the UK, being repatriated there, then paying off, and it's just, when you look at the hedging on that, it's a nightmare. And I don't know what the dollar is at the moment. When I was looking, it was like 1.14 to the pound. So, if you've got, I don't know, increases in inflation in salaries overseas, and your main hub's the UK, but you're open up in America or anywhere that's index linked to the dollar, or even the euro's got stronger against the pound, your costs are going up. In America, they might have gone up 15-20% just on Forex, plus salaries are going up as well. So again, revisit those cash flows, because growth burns cash. And if you're burning cash and growing, Forex is kicking you in the nuts, and everybody's like wading into the greenback, which is essentially for anybody that kind of happens when people are worried about the market. They feel the dollar is a safe place to go, right? So again, you've got this trade-off between the growth in America and actually these increasing costs, and what you're going to be able to bring back and repatriate in the country as well, which is great if you're making loads of money in America and you can bring it back on shore. You're gonna get double bubble in terms of you're going to make much more money. But these are things, again, you need to be looking at in terms of your cash flow. Salaries have gone up, so therefore, in effect, our fees have gone up in pound notes, but the buying power is the same. Right, you've got a Bank of England saying 20% interest, increase in inflation in this country by the end of the year. If they're saying that and the way they track it, which isn't accurate, you're probably talking a lot more than that, right, in terms of what's going on. So there will be an increase. There will be an increase in salaries and fees in the pound notes, but percentages are relative. But I also think, is there anyone who's not in a candidate-driven market? Is it not that position? Because we discussed this on Thursday. There was someone in the room who was given rebates, which I would, unless you're dealing with a massive blue chip who won't do anything, but I just don't see why you do that in such a candidate-driven market at the moment. But we talked about that. We talked about putting your rates up, and I know a lot of people had in a lunch we did in June started to put their rates up. I know like places like, was it Nigel Frank in the US went to 40% from 30%. Are we going out to our clients and sitting down with them and trying to set scopes where we can understand a little bit more about their business and look at their roadmap so that we can start fixing things in for them on the basis of, let's do this because you will be hit with higher costs, especially come the new year. forecast 20% inflation, if your costs are going to go up 20%, are you going to be able to deliver to your end client? Are you going to have an agile supply chain yourself? Let's come in and look at that. Let's do a scope of your workforce. Let's do a scope of your processes and operating procedures, and make sure that we can get you the talent you require over that period of time. Are we doing that? Are we going out and speaking to clients and trying to get a little bit more kind of in bed with them and solidify those relationships? Anyone? No one? God, come on.
When you say mapping it, and this might be a really stupid question, but what do you actually do?
When I first did it myself, which was a bit blue tack and sticky tape and all sorts of things, but it was just a questionnaire, right? So we would sit with different employees. So we'd do an environment map first. So I would go to a client and say, right, okay, who's your 3 or 4 best performers? Where's these people here? Sometimes we'd ask for the worst performers, but they didn't like to give that in terms of what they're doing, because what we would then do is we would question these individuals, because we would say to the client, look, it's not the mission statement on your website or on your wall or what you gave at the last company speech. What actually makes these people good is sometimes some intrinsic values to them that match the values of the company or the people they're working with, all these types of things. So what we do is we drill down on that. We get a consensus of maybe 3 to 5 points work really well. We use that to write adverts as well. So it's like subliminal shortlisting. But we can work out what good looks like in your environment. So we call it an environment map. If then we went in and we said, right, we're going to look at your workforce, we did a skills gap analysis. I didn't do that myself. I would get an occupational psychologist, they're cheap as chips, really, to come in and do this type of stuff. And you go in and they set questionnaires and you find out certain things. You just kind of map the data, and you'll find people that are maybe unutilized, which is the reason I mention that is that's the best one for them, making you feel like you're not just trying to do placement upon placement upon placement. Because you found Dean's pretty good at a few things, but he's not really being used to his maximum capacity here. If you buddied him up with this person or put him in this department, that might be a better option for you. But then, I've got Gary over here and actually don't know what he's doing. So we're gonna move him off or get him there or do his training. So again, we would supply training as well. And from the back of that, we just ended up being in bed with them for years, right? Being able to, and the beauty of it is that if you go in and do a scope for any of your clients and you do it, let's say at C-suite level, right? And then you start to implement these changes for them. They give you a project to work on, but you're working with middle management afterwards. You're placing people. You've got the say-so of the board. They hate it, right? Their nose is out of joint. They're pushing up information. Oh, it's not working. These guys don't know what they're doing. But if you've drilled down on a consensus across the board of what good looks like, right, and you've got that information, and everybody within that steering group or that board or C-suite or whatever has ownership of a little bit of that. And so when I turn up as middle manager and say, look, do you know what? Jez doesn't know what he's doing. Oh, no, well, we can do this ourselves. And they say, well, which part? And what's this? Well, this is what we've decided. This is what we want done. So you've always got the backing of the board, and it actually just keeps you in there, right? And then everybody else falls into line. And if they don't, they generally bugger off and you fill their position. But going in there and doing a scope, you don't have to have the knowledge yourself in terms of I can do all of these things myself, but you just need to understand what would give you leverage value in terms of understanding knowledge within that client that you could use to then say, right, okay, let's partner in this way and let's provide this service. And you can charge for that, because we used to charge, many years ago, we was charging about 10 grand a pop. But if they did the work with us, then over that period of time, we would knock off that to the end fees or whatever the project was, or over a period of time. If they didn't, they still had some data they could go away with and go and hire A, B or C agency, but they'd paid us 10 grand to do it. But no one's going to know that client like we know that client. So it just gives it, it's kind of that leverage point. But yeah, is anyone doing any of that? I mean, there's a couple of people actually on lunch on Thursday who were doing some of that stuff. Is anyone going in and really mapping their clients and making sure that they can do things for the long term rather than tiny projects or little ad hoc bits of work? I know markets are different. Some don't work that way, but in general, there's an opportunity in lots of places to do that. Is anyone else doing that? Anyone attempted to do that?
Yeah. Dean, I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
So in this situation, we're talking obviously about maybe what's coming around the corner. Would your advice be land grab? Like, take as much as you can. Don't get too concerned about actual, profit, but you probably want that business to keep the lights on, as it were. Give you that recurring revenue month in, month out, right? We're charging retainers, 20, 30, 40 grand per month as a retainer on a, 600, 700, 800 grand piece of business. Would you take that business on because of where you think the market's going to go?
I would, if you can service it. I mean, I'd take it on, not on the basis of I'd go in cheap at this moment in time, because I think
no.
When people pay, they pay attention, right? And it's making sure, because you're in your type of service, you're always selling value, right? And that's why they're going to pay you up front for it, because they see the value in what you're going to deliver over a period of time. But anything contractual over whether it's 12 months or more helps you with forecasting, helps you valuation of your business, helps you really set some strong processes and procedures, because it's not being pulled from pillar to post. So there's a lot of efficiencies and benefits to your business as a whole in just working that way. And there's a lot of businesses that do that, and they have contracts rolling out. They if they go to sale or go to market, and there's a business that's equally as profitable in the same space, but it's doing ad hoc business, the one with that kind of quasi revenue going forward that they can see will always get a few more turns on a multiple, will always do better. That's why contracts, because they're worth something, right? Because they at least know that they're going to be able to produce that amount of business over a period of time. So for me, I've always been someone who likes to go after contracts if they're there to be had, big projects. I would definitely, and at this point in time, it's if you need to, you're pipping someone at the post, or you need to do a bit of leverage, looking at forward rolling your cash and fixing some of the costs to get away from some of those inflationary pressures for them, might get them to sign up for more and for longer in the short term. Look, if you're not doing automation, and you're not using bots and chat bots and whatever else to map your processes, how are we finding things like LinkedIn? How are we finding the mediums for providing the candidates at the moment? Are they flat? They're doing the same? They're doing worse? They're doing better? What are we finding in terms of the movement of candidates, kind of in the marketplace? Because I think even Biden has now declared the pandemic over yesterday, and Spain finally removed all of the restrictions for travel. So I think most of the world is back to normal, even officially. Is anybody seen any differences? Is anyone just not getting the returns on LinkedIn anymore? I just see they've put their prices up, haven't they?
I'll just mention, Dean, just on LinkedIn. I mean, it is a bit flat for me as well in the technology space, but what it does allow you to do is obviously link in your other software to it. So, if you're putting your Sourcewells or Reply or Interseller or whatever else you might be throwing on the top of it, it does make that reach out quite good. So if you can grab that information, get their phone numbers, get their mobiles, put that automate that and get that onto your database, that's working really well for me, even if I can't get that candidate in the short term, as you know. So I think, with all the job boards going up, obviously LinkedIn will probably follow suit, but there's still a lot of value in that, I think.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I get that, because it's not standalone, is it? It's part of your entire process. Yeah. So you've got to make that work. Anything else? Anyone got any issues before we call this one, in terms of just things that are going on with return from September? A couple of businesses I've done some stuff with over the last 6-8 weeks, looking at their numbers. They were worried about bits of drop off in contract, but really it was utilization. A lot of contracts doing 12, 13 days a month, that type of stuff. And because, if they're not all on school holidays, that can be spread almost from June until September. But things are, I see growth rates in most businesses. What's this? Do you still advocate 6 months cash in the bank? David, I've never advocated 6 months cash in the bank. When I run my biggest company, we kind of worked on about a month. My feeling with cash is, I know people like to have some comfort. I think 3 months is enough, right? That money in the bank isn't doing anything for you. But money for me is losing buying power all the time, right? If you leave it in the bank, it's flaming useless. It's going back at 20% in real terms. So it's going to buy 20% less than it bought before. So you're seeing those increases all over the place. It has an energy. Money is something that you do something with. It gives you options on different things, but it's an energy that I think, if you have the right business plans and you can take on the right end clients, that you should be consistently and constantly reinvesting in your business for growth unless you're at that point in time where you kind of sat there and you want to take a few quid out. But putting it back into your business, because if you've got too much cash and you've got nothing to spend it on, you know, why let its buying power, you know, go down and pay your corporation tax and whatever else, and it just take it out and pay off your mortgage or do what you need to do, because at least there's an appreciating asset there. So I would say for those who like to be comfortable, 3 months, but generally we had about a month to 6 weeks at maximum, because the money was being put back to work. But then again, we had a business that was cash tight because of its growth. So yeah, but that's my feeling. You might find different FDs say different things, but yeah, if you speak to my old FD Dan Urmson, he'll tell you we were kind of working on a month, because I couldn't see any point. Look, if my business is off that much that I can't pay the salaries, I've got people that I can sack, but I've also got some levers I can pull and muck around with different things in terms of whatever it is, VAT, payments, PayYE. There's ways you can create cash as long as you're on top of it. And if the business is that bad, you're taking drastic actions anyway. So personally, 3 months at any time. And the other final point to say on that, again, businesses I've seen over the last few years that have had big balance sheets, when they have had tough times, they say, oh, we'll be all right for this month. And then these people still don't perform. And then, oh no, we're gonna be fine. Yeah, we've still got cash, we'll be fine this month. They'll do it this month. And then you end up, you're 3 to 4 months down the line, you're eating away at your cash, but your people still aren't performing. Okay, so again, you know, a little bit, you know, hire slowly, fire fast, as they say. But as long as you're on top of your cash and you know who's a performer and what their run rates are, when you're going to get return on investment in someone, you know how to keep that cash line tight and put it back into use in your business. So for me, if you've got cash, whether it's sat in your bank at home, all right, find something to do with it, because it's just going backwards. It's moonwalking every single day. All right, super. All right, guys and ladies, have a great week, and I will catch up with you all soon. Take care.